Lena had been working at the restaurant for almost 2 years, and every day felt like she was walking through the same routine, one shift after another. She arrived before the sun fully rose, tied her apron, and stepped onto the polished floor that always smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and roasted coffee. Even though she was tired most mornings, she tried to keep a soft smile on her face. Guests came in with all kinds of moods, and she had learned to stay calm no matter what. People were unpredictable, but her patience was the thing that helped her keep this job. The restaurant itself was one of those places that rich people liked to visit. Large windows covered one side of the building, letting in morning light that bounced off the marble tiles. Chandeliers hung like floating stars, and every table was decorated with a small candle even during the day. To many, it looked luxurious and peaceful. To Lena, it was a workplace that demanded perfection. She had to move fast, but stay graceful, speak politely even when people talked down to her, and carry trays that felt heavier than they looked. Still, she didn't complain. She needed the job more than most people knew. Her mother had fallen ill the year before, and medical bills kept showing up one after another. Her younger brother was still in school, and she didn't want him working yet. So Lena worked double shifts whenever she could. On some nights, she went home so tired that she could barely untie her apron. But she always reminded herself that she was doing it for her family. The restaurant had one corner that people rarely noticed. Behind a door that said, "Storage Staff Only," there was an old upright piano covered in a cloth. The owner had bought it years ago for small weekend performances, but eventually hired a live band and pushed the piano aside. Lena discovered it during her first month at the job. She had been curious when she saw the door half open, and when she stepped inside and pulled the cloth off the piano, her breath caught for a moment. Music had been her dream once. When she was younger, she spent hours practicing scales and simple pieces, dreaming of playing on a big stage someday. Her mother used to sit beside her and encourage her, saying she had something special in her hands. But dreams were fragile. When life became difficult, lessons stopped, and the piano teacher understood, but couldn't continue teaching her for free. Lena always told herself she would return to music one day, but that day never came. And yet, the piano in the storage room gave her a small escape. On slow evenings, when she finished cleaning early, she slipped inside, closed the door, and let her fingers glide across the keys. The piano was out of tune in some places, but she didn't care. Even a single melody helped her breathe easier, helped her feel like she was still holding on to a piece of who she once was. She played softly, so nobody would notice. The last thing she wanted was to bother the staff or get scolded by the manager for wasting time. But the music made her feel human again, even if just for a few minutes. One Tuesday morning began like any other, but the staff was already buzzing with talk about a big event happening that night. A famous millionaire, someone known for his expensive taste and loud personality, had booked the entire restaurant for a private gathering. His name was Mr. Harrow, and everyone seemed nervous just hearing it. Lena didn't know much about him, except what she overheard from the chefs and servers. He liked to show off. He enjoyed having people's attention. And he wasn't exactly known for kindness. The manager gathered all the staff near the entrance before lunch service. He straightened his tie 3 times, adjusted his glasses, and spoke in a serious tone. "We need everything to be perfect tonight. Every glass spotless. Every table set exactly the same. No mistakes, not even small ones." Lena nodded along with everyone else. She had worked during private events before, and they were always stressful. Guests expected luxury, and the staff had to deliver it without slipping up. Still, she stayed calm. Hard work didn't scare her, but as she brushed past 2 servers whispering near the counter, she heard something that made her chest tighten. "I heard she can play piano," one of them said. "Who?" "Lena?" the other replied. Seriously? A waitress who can play piano? That's a new one. They both laughed before walking away to continue their work. Lena froze for a moment. She had always been careful. She never played loud, never stayed long. How did they find out? A small wave of embarrassment washed through her, and she hoped they weren't making fun of her. She didn't like being the center of attention. It reminded her how far she had drifted from her dreams, how she had ended up serving tables instead of playing music in front of an audience. Throughout the afternoon, she tried to focus on her tasks. She polished silverware until her fingers ached, arranged napkins perfectly, and carried dishes in and out of the kitchen. But the whisper she overheard kept returning in her mind. It made her feel exposed, as if someone had opened a part of her life she preferred to keep quiet. When evening approached, the restaurant transformed. Staff changed into darker uniforms. Candles were lit at every table, and elegant flower arrangements were placed along the walls. Soft music played through the speakers, the kind of music that made people feel wealthy just by sitting in the room. Then the guests started, arriving. Men in tailored suits and women in sparkling dresses filled the hall with chatter and laughter. They carried the kind of confidence that came from knowing they could buy anything they wanted. Servers rushed around offering drinks, and chefs prepared dish after dish behind the kitchen doors. Lina moved quietly between tables, always keeping her posture straight and her voice gentle. She had learned how to become almost invisible, polite, efficient, and calm. When a guest snapped their fingers at her, she responded with patience. When another complained the water wasn't cold enough, she apologized and fixed it. This was her job, and she did it well. But the moment Mr. Harrow arrived, everything changed. He walked into the room like he owned not just the restaurant, but the city itself. His suit was perfectly fitted, his shoes polished so brightly they reflected the lights above. He greeted guests loudly, laughing with a confidence that filled the room. People rushed to him, eager to be noticed by someone so wealthy and influential. He scanned the room with a sharp gaze, as if he was evaluating every detail. When his eyes landed on Lena for the first time, she felt a strange pressure settle on her shoulders. It wasn't admiration. It was something more like curiosity, mixed with judgment. She lowered her eyes and continued working. At one point, Lena passed by a group of guests gathered near the bar. She didn't mean to listen, but their voices carried clearly. I heard one of the staff can play piano, a man said. Maybe we'll get a little performance tonight. Mr. Harrow turned toward the group with interest. Who is it? He asked. The waiter over there? No, someone replied with a chuckle. The girl. The waitress. A few people laughed lightly, as if the idea itself was amusing. Lena felt her stomach twist. She wanted to disappear. She didn't want strangers thinking of her like a novelty. She hadn't played the piano for praise, only to comfort herself. Mr. Harrow lifted an eyebrow. A waitress who plays piano, he said, sounding more entertained than impressed. That's something new. The conversation ended as quickly as it began, but the unease stayed with her. She tried to avoid looking in their direction for the rest of the night. Hours passed, and the event continued smoothly. Drinks were poured, conversations echoed through the hall, and music flowed from the speakers, while the grand piano in the center of the room sat untouched. Lena had wiped its surface earlier, making sure it looked spotless, but she never imagined she would become the topic of anyone's conversation tonight. Little did she know, the night was far from over, and the quiet world she had built around herself, one where she stayed unnoticed and safe, was about to be shaken in a way she never expected. Lena tried her best to stay focused, but the whisper she heard earlier kept echoing in her mind. She moved from table to table, refilling glasses, collecting empty plates, and making sure no guest felt ignored. But she could feel eyes on her every now and then, curious eyes, amused eyes. and some that seemed to look at her as if she were part of the evening's entertainment rather than a person doing her job. The grand piano stood in the center of the room like a silent spotlight. Its glossy surface reflected the warm lights above, and every time Lena passed by it, she felt a strange pull in her chest. She kept her distance, carrying trays in the opposite direction whenever she could. She had played in secret for so long that the thought of touching a piano in front of 100 people made her heart race. She was wiping a table when her manager suddenly appeared beside her. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "Just be careful tonight. The guests are in a playful mood. If anyone asks you anything unusual, stay polite, but don't feel pressured." His tone was soft, but uneasy. Lena nodded. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Just keep your calm. That's all." Then he hurried away to help another server. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, a loud burst of laughter erupted from the group near the bar. She knew exactly who the center of attention was. Mr. Harrow had gathered a group around him, telling a story and waving his hands with grand movements as if he were performing on a stage. People hung on to his every word. The more they admired him, the louder he became. He thrived on seeing others react to him, and he seemed to enjoy being the most important person in the room. Lena avoided looking in that direction, but she couldn't ignore the sudden hush that fell over the nearby tables. Conversations stopped. Eyes turned toward her. She felt a chill before she even turned around to see what had changed. Mr. Harrow was pointing at her. "There she is," he announced loudly. The young waitress with a hidden talent. Her heart dropped. She froze in place, gripping the cloth she was holding. A few guests turned their heads, curious. Some smiled as if expecting something amusing to happen. Lena kept her eyes down, hoping he would lose interest. But he didn't. Single quotes T. Mr. Harrow lifted his chin and called out, "Come here for a moment." She felt the entire room watching. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked toward him, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the small crowd, she kept her posture steady, even though she wanted nothing more than to disappear. "Yes, sir?" she said softly. He smiled at her the way someone smiles at a child about to do a trick. "I heard you can play piano." Lena's breath caught. She glanced quickly at the other guests. Many of them were grinning, waiting to see what would happen next. It's just something I used to do," she said carefully. "Nothing serious." "Oh, come on now," he said, waving his hand. "No need to be shy. We're all friends here." A few guests chuckled. Lena tried again. "Sir, I'm only here to serve tonight." Yes, of course," he said, pretending to agree. But then he stepped aside and gestured toward the grand piano. "But a little tune won't hurt. Consider it a pleasant surprise for our guests." The group around him clapped lightly, encouraging the moment. Lena felt her throat tighten. Why was he doing this? She didn't know him, and she certainly hadn't asked for attention. She could see clearly in his expression that this wasn't about appreciating music. It was about amusement. His amusement. Her manager watched from across the room, eyes full of worry. He didn't intervene. He couldn't. This was a wealthy client, the kind they could not afford to upset. Lena stood still, torn between embarrassment and fear of losing her job. Saying no could make the situation worse. Saying yes could humiliate her. "Go on," one woman said kindly, though her tone suggested curiosity more than real kindness. "We'd love to hear you." Another man added, "Just one piece. Make it short if you want." Lena took a slow breath, steadying her hands. She had always been taught to stay calm under pressure. This moment felt like the hardest test of that lesson. She nodded gently. If that's what you want." Mr. Harrow clapped once, satisfied. "Wonderful. Everyone, let's enjoy a bit of unexpected music." He stepped back, allowing her to walk toward the piano. As she moved across the room, the noise softened around her. The clinking of glasses faded. Even the soft background music began to feel distant. She felt exposed, like each step she took was under a spotlight. She reached the piano and slowly pulled out the bench. The polished wood felt cold under her fingers. She sat down carefully, making sure her back stayed straight the way she'd been taught years ago. Her hands hovered above the keys. She paused. In that quiet moment, she felt a flood of old memories, her childhood lessons. The afternoons spent practicing until her fingers ached. The sound of her mother humming in the next room. The dreams she held on to even when life got tough, but she also felt the weight of the eyes watching her now. They weren't here to be moved by her music. Most of them were expecting a joke, a moment of entertainment they could laugh about. Her heart pounded. Her palms grew warm. Then she heard a soft voice from behind her, her manager, speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. "You can do this," he whispered. Lena's breath steadied. She placed her fingers on the keys. At first, she played a simple note, just one. The sound echoed softly through the hall. No one spoke. The silence was deep and expectant. She began with a melody she had learned when she was very young. It was gentle and slow, something she could play even with shaky hands. The first few notes were careful, almost timid, but they flowed smoothly. She kept her eyes on the keys, not daring to look at anyone. As she played, something inside her began to loosen. The stress in her shoulders softened. Her breathing found a rhythm. The music became her shelter again, just like it used to be. She let the melody grow richer. Her fingers moved faster, gliding across the keys with a confidence she didn't even realize she still had. She shifted into a piece she had practiced secretly at the old piano in the storage room. It was more emotional, the kind of music that didn't just fill a room. It filled hearts. The hall stayed silent. She played as if she were alone, just her and the piano. Every memory, every ache, every dream she thought she had lost poured out through her fingers. When she pressed the final key, the sound floated for a moment before fading into complete stillness. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Lena sat frozen, afraid to lift her head. Then applause exploded through the room. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't forced. It was loud, honest, surprised. People stood up. Some looked stunned. Some looked touched. Others simply stared at her, unable to believe what they had just heard. Lena finally looked up, and her eyes widened at the sight. Dozens of faces, no longer mocking or curious, but amazed. Her hands trembled again, but this time, not from fear. She stepped back from the piano, unsure what to do next. She wasn't used to being seen like this. As the applause continued, she caught a glimpse of Mr. Harrow. His expression was tight, not pleased, not proud. Shocked. And maybe even embarrassed. He had expected a joke. Instead, she had taken the entire room's breath away. The night was far from over. But Lena had changed something in that moment, something bigger than she realized. She had shown them, without trying, who she truly was. For a moment, Lena could not move. She stood near the piano, unsure whether to bow, step back, or simply disappear into the crowd. The applause felt unreal. She had never expected anyone to clap for her again, not after years spent hiding her music in a storage room where no one would hear. She looked around slowly, almost afraid that the reaction she was seeing wasn't real. But it was. People were smiling at her, nodding, some even whispering to each other with astonished expressions. A few guests had their hands pressed lightly to their chests, as if her music had touched something deep inside them. Lena felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know where to look or how to respond. She stepped away from the piano, wanting to melt back into her quiet place as a server, but that quietness was gone for now. The applause had pulled her into something she wasn't prepared for. Her manager stood near the wall, eyes shining with pride. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "You did more than good." She felt grateful for that little bit of encouragement he had given her earlier. Without it, she might never have placed her hands on those keys at all. But while many faces glowed with admiration, one stood out in stark contrast, not Mr. Harrow. He was still seated near the bar, one hand gripping his glass, his jaw tight. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. His eyes were fixed on Lena, not with anger exactly, but with something harder to read, something between disbelief, frustration, and a bruised ego. Lena knew immediately that this was not the outcome he had expected. The applause slowly softened, though conversations picked up again with a new excitement. Guests began talking about the performance in enthusiastic tones. "She plays like a professional," one man said. "That was beautiful," a woman told her friend, still glancing toward the piano. "Who would have thought?" Another whispered, not unkindly, just amazed. Lena tried to slip away quietly, but suddenly a couple approached her. "Excuse me," the woman said gently. "That was wonderful, truly." Lena smiled shyly. "Thank you. That means a lot." Another man stepped closer. "Do you play somewhere? A music school, maybe?" "Oh, no," Lena replied softly. "I just practice when I can." He looked surprised, but impressed. "You have real talent. Don't hide it." Before she could respond, someone else approached her, an older gentleman with a calm face and neat suit. His eyes had a thoughtful warmth to them. He offered her a small smile. "I hope you don't mind," he said, "but may I ask how long you've been playing?" "Since I was younger," she answered quietly, "but not much in recent years." He nodded, studying her with genuine interest. "Well, it certainly doesn't show. You play with a feeling that can't be taught. You should consider performing somewhere more often." Lena lowered her gaze, unsure of how to handle such attention. She had never been praised like this by strangers before. Her hands still felt warm from the piano keys. She was still catching her breath. "I'll think about it," she said politely. The man smiled once more and stepped away, blending back into the crowd, just as Lena was about to return to her work. A server rushed over to her. "A guest would like to speak with you," he said in a low voice that her heart skipped. "Who?" The server hesitated. "Someone important." Before she could ask more, she looked past him and noticed a tall man standing near one of the side tables. He held a simple drink in his hand and watched her with an expression that was neither impressed nor amused, just deeply thoughtful. But this man didn't give off the same energy as Mr. Harrow. His presence felt calm, steady. Lena did not recognize him. When she approached him, he offered a warm smile. "You played beautifully," he said. "I didn't expect to hear something like that tonight." "Thank you," she replied. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." He extended a small business card toward her. "I'm involved in music production. Not the flashy kind, real, thoughtful work. If you ever want to explore your talent further, give me a call. No pressure. Just think about it." Lena stared at the card for a moment. Music production? It felt like something from another world, one she had left behind long ago. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything now," he said. "Just keep the card. And keep playing." With a gentle nod, he stepped away, leaving her with the card in her hand. She looked down at it, her heart fluttering. It felt unreal, like she was holding a tiny piece of a dream she once lost. Before she could even slip the card into her pocket, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Everyone!" It was Mr. Harrow. Guests turned their heads toward him again. He stood with his shoulders squared, as if trying to regain his place at the center of attention. He forced a laugh. "Well, that was something, wasn't it?" he said loudly. Our talented waitress here knows how to surprise us. Some guests clapped again softly, though the mood felt different, now less playful, more respectful. But his smile looked stiff, pinned in place. There was a small crack in his confident expression, as if her unexpected success had unsettled him. He raised his glass. "To unexpected entertainment," he announced. A few guests echoed with polite cheers, but the enthusiasm was nothing compared to the genuine applause she had received earlier. Lena felt awkward standing there, unsure whether to acknowledge his toast or walk away. She simply nodded politely and stepped back, returning to her duties. As she moved between the tables again, offering drinks and clearing plates, she could still feel the energy of the room shifted around her. People looked at her differently, not as just another server, but as someone with a hidden depth. Some smiled warmly. Others nodded as she passed. A few even whispered compliments as quietly as they could, so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. And through it all, Mr. Harrow's eyes followed her. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't kindness. It was something else, something heavy. She tried not to let his gaze affect her, but it lingered like a shadow. Later in the evening, while collecting empty glasses from a table, she overheard two guests talking. She really put him in his place. One whispered, "He thought she'd embarrass herself." The other replied, "Instead, she embarrassed him." Lena felt her heart quicken. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want to upset anyone, especially not someone as powerful as Mr. Harrow. This night had been unexpected for her, too. She had only wanted to survive the evening without drawing attention. But now, her performance had shifted the entire atmosphere. People were still talking about it, still glancing at the piano, as if expecting another surprise. Time passed slowly after that. The event continued, guests mingled, music played softly, and the staff worked hard to keep everything smooth. But every now and then, someone would stop Lena just to say something kind. "You have a gift," one woman told her. "Don't let it go to waste." "You should be on a stage," another man said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You made this night unforgettable," someone else whispered. All these words felt like warm lights in her heart. She wasn't used to being praised. She wasn't used to being truly seen. But even with all the kindness, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in her stomach whenever she noticed Mr. Harrow watching her from across the room. Eventually, the night began to wind down. Guests trickled out in small groups, thanking the staff or waving goodbye. The chatter softened, and the lively energy of the evening slowly settled. When the last few guests were preparing to leave, Lena finally allowed herself to breathe fully. Her shift wasn't over, but the hardest part of the night seemed to be behind her. She returned to the piano once more, just to wipe fingerprints off its surface. As her hand brushed over the keys, a soft smile touched her lips. She still couldn't believe she had played in front of so many people. "You made an impression tonight." The voice behind her made her turn. It was her manager again. His face carried a look of both pride and concern. "You did something brave," he said, "and you handled it beautifully." "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't want to embarrass anyone." "You didn't," he said gently. "You simply showed who you are." But before she could say anything more, he glanced toward the bar where Mr. Harrow was finishing a drink, his expression unreadable. "Be careful," her manager murmured. "Not everyone likes being proven wrong." Lena swallowed. "I'll be fine," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure. As the night drew closer to its end, and the restaurant slowly emptied, Lena felt something inside her shift, something important, something quiet but powerful. For the first time in years, she felt like her dream wasn't completely lost, but she also sensed that not everyone was. happy about what had happened, and the consequences of that were still waiting in the shadows of the night ahead. The room stayed silent for a few long seconds after she finished playing, and in that silence she stood there trying to understand what had just happened. For a moment, she wondered if maybe she had imagined the applause in her mind, but then she heard one pair of hands start clapping again. Then another, and another. The sound grew until it filled the entire hall. She stood quietly, almost frozen, unsure how to react to so many eyes suddenly looking at her, with warmth instead of judgment. She lowered her hands from the piano slowly, still feeling the soft tremble in her fingers from how much heart she had put into the performance. She had not meant to prove anything to anyone. She had only played the way she always played when no one was watching. But now everyone had seen her, really seen her, and that thought alone was enough to make her throat tighten. She tried to step back from the piano bench, but before she could move, a woman from the crowd came closer. The woman had been sitting near the front, and she looked genuinely touched. She reached out as if to offer comfort or admiration, but the girl gently stepped back, embarrassed to be at the center of everyone's attention. All her life, she had tried to stay invisible. She did her job quietly, kept her head down, and worked hard. Performing in front of a wealthy crowd like this was never something she had imagined, especially not in a room where people had looked at her earlier like she didn't belong. Across the hall, the man who had urged her play stood still. His expression had changed so much that she barely recognized him. Minutes ago, he had been full of confidence, proud of the joke he thought he had made at her expense. Now he was confused in a way he had not expected. She could see something shifting in his face, a mix of surprise, disbelief, and something like regret. He walked toward her slowly, adjusting the sleeves of his sharp suit as if doing so would give him more control over the moment. His steps were steady, but there was something different in the way he held himself now. He seemed smaller somehow, or perhaps the room simply no longer revolved around him. She didn't want a confrontation, especially not after opening up so much through her music. She had shown a part of herself that she usually kept hidden, and now she felt exposed. When she saw him approaching, she lightly shook her head and looked away. But he kept walking until he stood a few steps away from her. The crowd watched closely, waiting to see what he would do. Even though she didn't look at him directly, she felt his presence and the tension that wrapped around them. "I didn't expect that," he said quietly. His voice, which had earlier carried arrogance, now held uncertainty. She finally lifted her eyes slightly toward him, though not fully meeting his gaze. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what he wanted. "You have real talent," he said again, this time louder, as if speaking to the crowd as well. "I had no idea." She felt the room fall silent again. She didn't know what response he expected. It wasn't her job to comfort him or make him feel better for what he had done. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was almost too quiet to hear, but it was gentle, and for a moment he looked relieved. But she wasn't relieved. She felt more overwhelmed than anything else. She started taking small steps back, wanting to return to the kitchen, to the safety of the place where she didn't have to carry a spotlight on her shoulders. Before she could turn to go, several guests surrounded her. They weren't harsh or judgmental. They were excited, curious, full of admiration. They asked her where she had learned to play, how long she had been practicing, and whether she performed professionally. Their questions poured out so quickly that she barely knew how to respond. She answered politely, but kept her words short. She didn't want to be rude, but she also wasn't used to so much attention. The sudden praise felt overwhelming after years of being unnoticed. Someone asked her if she could play one more piece, and she smiled nervously, unsure how to decline without sounding ungrateful. Another person suggested she should consider auditioning somewhere, Maybe even working with music schools. She took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. She wasn't sure if she was ready for anything like that. Music had always been something private for her, something she used to escape the weight of daily life. The man who had forced her to perform earlier stood a short distance away, watching all of this unfold. His hands were in his pockets now, his posture less sure. He looked like someone trying to understand how everything had gone so differently from what he planned. She caught his eye for a moment. For the first time, she didn't look away quickly. She saw an expression that she hadn't expected, a mix of apology and realization. Maybe he hadn't meant to hurt her as deeply as he did, or maybe he was only now seeing the impact of his actions. She didn't know which was true, and honestly, she didn't need to know. What mattered was that this moment wasn't about him anymore. One of the older guests stepped closer to her with a kind smile. "You have a gift," the older guest said softly. "Don't hide it. People like you deserve to be heard." Her chest tightened at those words. She wasn't used to that kind of encouragement. No one had ever insisted that her dreams were worth something. She lowered her eyes and said quietly, "Thank you." But the guests gently shook their head. "No, thank you. You changed the whole mood of the night." She looked up slowly, unsure how to respond. She had only played the way she always played, but maybe the honesty in her music had reached people in a way she never expected. The room gradually returned to its lively rhythm. Soft chatter filled the air again, and soft music began playing from the speakers. Yet the atmosphere was different than before. Warmer, gentler, and almost everyone who passed by her gave her a nod, a smile, or a quiet word of praise. She finally slipped away from the crowd and headed toward the hallway that led back to the staff area. She needed air, space, anything that would help her calm down. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She had a feeling she knew who it was. When the man's voice reached her, it was softer than she had ever heard it. "Can we talk?" he asked. She stopped walking, but didn't turn around yet. She took a slow breath before finally turning to face him. He stood there with his shoulders lowered slightly, as if he had dropped a weight he didn't realize he was carrying. "I didn't mean for things to go that way," he said quietly. "I really didn't. I don't know what I thought. I was trying to be funny, but I crossed the line." She looked at him calmly, waiting. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology sounded real, honest, not something forced in front of the crowd. She nodded slowly. She didn't have it in her to be angry forever. She didn't like holding on to hurt. But forgiveness wasn't something she would give instantly either. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I need some time." He nodded in understanding. "Of course. I just wanted you to know that I mean it." She appreciated that. Maybe people could grow. Maybe people could learn. She was about to leave when he spoke again. "You should keep playing," he said. "You're meant for more than any of us knew." She didn't respond, but she felt something warm settle quietly in her chest. When she returned to the staff area, the other employees looked at her with wide eyes. They had heard the music from afar and had felt the shift in the atmosphere. One of the cooks stepped forward with a smile. "We always knew you were special," he said. She laughed softly, both embarrassed and grateful. As the night went on, she tried to return to her tasks, but everything felt different. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not for her position, not for what she wore, but for something she carried inside. She wasn't sure what the future held. She wasn't sure if anything would change after tonight. But something inside her had awakened. Maybe she was allowed to dream again, and maybe, just maybe, her music could carry her somewhere she had never imagined. The night had ended, but her mind was still wide awake. Even after she left the mansion and walked home, everything felt unreal. The cold air outside helped her breathe easier, yet her heart was still full. almost trembling from everything that had happened. She replayed the sound of the applause in her head, not because she wanted praise, but because she had never imagined something like that would happen to her. For years she had carried her music quietly inside, unsure if it mattered. But tonight, strangers had heard it, and it had touched them. When she reached her small apartment, she placed her work bag on the table and sat down slowly. Her hands were still warm from playing the piano at the party. She stared at them for a while, thinking about how those same hands washed dishes, cleaned tables, lifted trays, and hurried through long shifts. Tonight, though, they had done something different, something that reminded her of the dreams she once had. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't sure how to process the night. Part of her felt proud. Another part felt scared. The attention from the guests had been overwhelming, and she didn't know what would happen next. Would they forget about her by morning? Or had something changed for real? She didn't know. And maybe that was okay. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. She didn't know why, but there was a strange, quiet excitement inside her. She got ready for work the same way she always did, simple clothes, tied back hair, nothing that drew attention. But even with her ordinary routine, she felt different. When she arrived at the restaurant attached to the mansion, the staff turned to look at her the moment she walked in. She froze for a second, thinking she might be in trouble for stepping away from her duties the night before. But then the cook, the one who had spoken kindly to her after the party, broke into a smile. "You're famous today," he joked light-heartedly. She blushed instantly. "Please don't say that," she whispered. "It's true," another worker said. "Half the guests were talking about you even as they left." She looked down, unsure how to respond. She didn't know what to do with so much attention. But they didn't tease her the way she had feared. They were smiling, proud of her. That alone warmed her heart, more than the applause from the night before. The rest of the morning passed quietly as she returned to her normal tasks. But every so often, someone would stop her to say, "You were incredible last night." She thanked them politely, but tried not to think too much about it. She didn't want her mind to run too far ahead. Around midday, she stepped out to the hallway to take a short break. She needed a few minutes of calm. As she leaned against the wall and took a breath, she heard footsteps approaching. Slow, steady footsteps she recognized. She looked up and saw him, the man from the party. He wasn't wearing his sharp suit today. Instead, he wore something simple, which made him look less like the intimidating figure who had stood in the center of the ballroom, and more like just a person. He paused a few feet away, as if unsure whether he should come closer. "Hi," he said quietly. She nodded politely. "Hello." He looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. It was strange seeing someone usually so confident look so unsure. "I know I apologized last night," he said, "but I want to say it again, and properly." She waited calmly. She didn't want to make this harder for him, but she also wanted to be honest with herself. "What I did was wrong," he continued. "I was trying to get a laugh from a few friends. I wasn't thinking about how it would make you feel. And after seeing how talented you are," he shook his head, "I realized how disrespectful I had been." She listened quietly. His words sounded real again, not forced. And that mattered. "Thank you," she said softly. "I accept your apology." He let out a small breath, relieved. Then, after a moment, he spoke again. "I wanted to ask you something. You don't have to say yes. But after seeing you play, I keep thinking it's wrong for the world not to hear you." She blinked, unsure what he meant. "I know people who work with music," he said slowly. "Real professionals. I talked to one of them this morning about you." She tensed. "You talked about me?" "Only about your performance," he said quickly, raising his hands in reassurance. "Nothing personal." I just described what I saw. And he wants to meet you, to hear you play." Her heart thumped hard in her chest. She didn't know whether to feel excited or scared. "You don't have to agree," he repeated gently. "I just thought maybe this could be a chance for you." She lowered her eyes, thinking. She had never imagined getting an opportunity like that. She had never even dreamed it seriously. The world of music, real music, not just playing alone, had always felt far away. "I'm not sure," she said truthfully. "That's okay," he said with a small smile. "Take your time. I'll be here if you want to talk about it." He stepped back slowly, giving her space. She watched him leave, her thoughts tangled. She didn't know what choice she should make, but she knew this was the first time in a long while that the world had opened a door for her instead of closing one. For the next few days, things felt different. Guests returned to the restaurant asking if she was the girl who had played the piano. Some asked if she could perform again. Others simply complimented her with kind smiles. She appreciated it deeply, but each compliment also reminded her of the decision she still hadn't made. One evening, after finishing her shift, she walked to the small community center where she used to practice on an old keyboard when she needed a quiet place. It had been years since she last played there. When she entered the dim room and sat down at the worn-out keys, she felt something settle inside her. She placed her fingers gently on the keyboard and let them move. The sound wasn't perfect, the keys were old, and some tones were uneven, but the music still filled the room softly. As she played, she realized something. She wasn't scared of performing. She wasn't scared of people hearing her. What she feared was disappointment, the possibility that she wasn't good enough. But last night, she had touched people. She had moved them. She couldn't deny that. Her fingers slowed until the music faded. She stared at the keys for a long moment. Maybe she didn't have to become a star. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. But she also didn't want to hide anymore. The next morning, she found the man in the hallway again. He was surprised to see her walk toward him so confidently. "I'll meet him," she said calmly. His surprise softened into a warm smile. "Really?" She nodded. "I don't know what will happen, but I want to try." "That's more than enough," he said. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, she practiced every chance she got during breaks, late at night, early in the morning. She didn't practice to impress anyone. She practiced because she wanted to honor the part of herself she had buried for so long. When the day finally came, she felt nervous but steady. She walked into the small music studio where the professional waited. He greeted her kindly and asked her to sit at the piano. "Play whatever feels right," he said. She took a slow breath and allowed her fingers to find the melody she always played when she was alone. A piece full of softness, longing, and hope. The man listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked down, afraid to meet his eyes. But then she heard him speak. "You have something rare," he said gently. "Something real. I would like to work with you, if you're willing." Her breath caught. She looked up with wide eyes. "Are you sure?" She whispered. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "You have a voice that should not be hidden." Her eyes warmed, tears forming softly, but without sadness. She nodded, unable to speak. That night, when she returned home, she stood by her window and looked out at the quiet street. The world looked the same as always, yet somehow it felt different. She wasn't a star yet. She wasn't famous. She wasn't even fully confident, but she had taken the first step. She had allowed herself to be seen. And maybe that was the beginning of something beautiful. She closed her eyes and placed a hand over her heart, feeling it beat steadily, full of hope, full of courage, full of music. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. The girl who once tried to stay invisible was invisible no longer.